Do you have any thoughts on how the world has shaped over time and how it all relates to should immigrants integrate or should they assimilate, and why how it has led to where we are today? Canada says we're multicultural and all that stuff, and so we want you to we're a mosaic and just all that kind of stuff. America says we're a melting pot. You come in and you assimilate, like you just forget everything.
Yeah, I think this is a really fantastic question, and it's something that all of us immigrants are dealing with, integration versus assimilation. And there's a rise in this wave, as you said, of people who want immigrants to assimilate in the world. I think this is coming from a couple of places. One of the places it's coming from is the West has always had an issue with diversity. Always, always, always. To the extent that they say that they believe in diversity, I've never really seen it put into practice.
Welcome back to the Newcomers Podcast, people, where I explore what it means to be an immigrant with immigrants like myself. Today, I have a really interesting guest, Aashrit Parvangada, who's been in Berlin for 4 years, But I think what I find interesting about Aashrit is he has this interesting, you should check out his Instagram, by the way. He has this interesting takes on the world, nationalism, politics, immigration, and and how it all affects us. And I was like, yo, I need to get him on the podcast. And now we're here, we're doing this. So welcome, man. Like, thank you so much for coming on the Newcomers, bro.
Thanks for having me, Dozier. I'm really happy to be here. And we had a quick conversation over an Instagram call, and I think we vibed really well.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to some of the hard topics that we're going to discuss today.
Oh yeah, I like that you say hard. But let's not start with hard. Let's kind of go back to moving to Berlin. I think that's an interesting choice. I mean, because if you talk to the average, if you talk to the average Nigerian, for example, and I'm probably guesstimating here, and let me just guesstimate for the sake of this conversation. I kind of sense that also if you talk to an Indian too, a lot of Indians, where you want to move to, they would say, "Oh, I want to move to the US,
Absolutely.
Canada lately, probably
Yeah.
Australia maybe, but I don't know if that's a big thing with Indians. I do know for Nigerians, it's not a big thing. It's just
It
a
is.
big thing. Oh, it's a big thing. But Berlin, like, so for example, is like, why Germany? Because I assume, do you speak the language?
I do speak a little bit. I'm not fluent, but I speak
Okay.
enough to get around.
Oh, awesome. So why Berlin? Like, why did you make that choice?
Man, that's a great question. So I actually lived in North America for some time. I
Ah,
lived in the US where I did a little stint with the UN, just volunteer work, but I was
yeah.
able to, participate in some conferences and things. And I lived in Canada for a bit as well. I s- I I studied in Canada, and what I studied there was video game design and development,
Oh shit.
which is one of my passions. Yeah.
You're
So I've
getting
been
more
on
interested by the
that
moment,
side of
man.
the pond. Yeah. So I was totally on that bandwagon, just like all the Indians out there, just like I imagine Nigerians to be, because we both have this Anglo-colonial
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, exactly.
Most Indians have a tier list in their head,
Mm.
right? If you ask Indians, where do you want to emigrate to? It's the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and then everywhere else, usually. And it's essentially the size of the
Yeah.
economies that they have in their head when they think of it, the
Yeah.
influence, the kind of money you can make, that kind of thing. And I was no different. As a young man, as a teenager, I was no different. I thought, okay, I'm going to finish my high school, get into a good university in North America somewhere, go there, make a good life, make money. And I am skipping a lot of the details, but eventually it
Yeah.
happened. I went to Canada and I studied there. And I liked it. I think I had a wonderful experience in Canada. I met lovely people, I made good friends, and I learned a lot as well. But at that time, my grandparents were getting old, and I was also starting to develop a sense of, I guess you could say, wanting to understand about my own culture from the experience of having lived somewhere else, which
Mm.
I hadn't really done. I grew up in Dubai for a bit, then I lived in India for my later teen years, and But Dubai is almost like India 2.0 in a way, in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. So after Canada, people would ask me a lot of questions like, why do Indians do this, or why is it like this in India? And sometimes ridiculous questions. Do you ride a tiger to school, or do you ride an elephant to school,
Oh
and things like
gosh.
that. But many of the questions they were asking me, I didn't really know the answer to well enough.
Mm.
So while I was in Canada, I started reading more about India, reading history books, and generally about the world. And that gave me this overwhelming sense of curiosity. I've always been a curious person, but this gave me a different sense of curiosity that I need to go back to India. I need to live there. I need to learn languages, multiple languages in India. And I need to immerse myself more. Because when
Mm.
I lived in India you could say during my teen years, from when I was 12 to 20-ish roughly, I lived in, I guess you could say, what we call an NRI bubble, a non-resident Indian.
Mm.
So I was someone
Mm.
who I grew up somewhere else. We came back to take care of my grandparents. And of course, I experienced a lot of India because you have to living
Yeah.
there. But much of my experience was also um, dreaming about when I would be able to leave at that time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after Canada, I actually did move back. I lived in India for another 4 years, and this time was a totally different experience, a totally different appreciation of culture and family and everything like that. And at the same time, I had a job. I worked in the video games industry. And there came a point in my career where I wasn't growing as much as I would like. There came a point in my own studies of culture and history where I wasn't learning as much as I would have liked to. And at that time, I applied to this company. I found a good opportunity in Germany, and I didn't really think I would get the job. I just applied out of curiosity, and I got the job at a lovely company that in tech. And I moved, not knowing very much about Europe, aside from the history books that I had read, not knowing very much about current day Europe, how its people think, how they live. And so I moved here just with an open mind and thinking, let's see how things play out. Let me get a feel for this part of the world that I don't have yet.
Yeah. and and what I want to build on, or what I want to explore now is, so you've had a really interesting, up till the time you moved to Berlin. Like, that's such an interesting infusion of cultures that you've had, because you've grown in Dubai, you come back to India as an NRI with that, and that thing you say about that thing of you're in India but you're dreaming of leaving. You know, it's such an interesting thing, because I think at some point in my life I was like that in Nigeria, where I moved across cities and I was there, but like everyone had always said, Dozier, you have to leave at some point. Like, you just have to leave. And so I feel like I was just there, but I wasn't like actively planning to leave, but somewhere in my subconscious, you just sort of knew that at some point you're gonna have to leave this country at some point, and you go. Like, you just have to go. So that's a really, really thing for someone to think about. Like, I feel like a lot of us don't even recognize that
Exactly.
nagging thing that's just going on the back of our head. But back to what I was saying is, so you move back to India, and you've lived, you worked in the US, worked in Canada, now you lived in Germany, and I'm assuming that as all this was happening, there's just that thread of that curious kid who's studying history and stuff, and so what I'm finding, what I want to understand is, with all the like, spend time in the US, India, Dubai, Canada, you move to Europe. Like, what hits you first? What's the first thing you actually kind of struggle with? Because like, I almost feel like you're not even a thought culture kid, man. Like, you're not. I don't even know. I wouldn't even call you a thought culture kid. I don't even know what to call you, honestly.
Fifth or sixth culture. I don't know what number
Exactly.
I'm at now.
Yeah. So like what hits you first? Because there's this thing people say, and I think you've mentioned in one of your videos, where like Europe is such a mature culture. Like it's such a mature culture that I would argue, I would dare say something very controversial. It's mature because it's recorded. Because I almost feel like the Indian culture, the Chinese culture, and a lot of the African culture is also that mature, but we just haven't done a pretty good job of keeping our history as much as they've done. But it's such a mature culture, and there are things you see they do that when especially if you come from North America, you're always like, okay, like what is like, and I'm just trying to understand, what was it like settling in with all the experiences you had had?
So, which aspect are you wondering about in
The
specific
the
in terms of
Berlin
what hit me?
settling in Germany with, because
Settling in
then,
Germany.
because it feels like you have a lot of, I don't want to call it baggage, but you're carrying a lot in your head of preconceived notions of how
Yeah.
things are done.
Yeah.
And there's also the layer of, okay, I want to understand India, and then you went back home and spent time there, and you now understand your people a bit more, and then you move to Europe. So who's the kid, or who's the young man who starts to settle into Europe? Like, who's that person? The Indian Aashrit, or the mix of everything, or like who starts to settle into Europe, and what are things you kind of struggle with?
That's a really good question. I think my Indianness, and maybe I'm spilling my guts out too much here, but
That's okay, and I want you to.
okay, good. My Indianness is something that I've always struggled with in a way. Might sound pretentious or something, but when I was in India, I felt like I was not from there. And
Fair.
to some degree, even today, even when I go back to India, I speak in English as a first language, even though I can communicate in Hindi and Kannada to some extent, to some limited degree. Um, I grew up in Dubai where we spoke English as a first language. And in India, while there is an English community, it's everything like the accent that I speak with, the
Mm,
experiences that I've had. It made me somewhat different to the people I was
yeah.
surrounded with. So in that sense, there is an there is a non-Indianness about me that is influenced by all of the places
Yeah.
that I've been. I grew up in Dubai to some extent. I lived in North America. I consume American and Japanese media my whole life. I speak Japanese quite decently as well. So all of these are influences
Mm-hmm.
that affect me. But when I'm not in India, the contrast becomes so glaring that I realize that absolutely I'm rooted in Indianness, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does.
Even things like the things that I value in terms of family values,
Yeah.
in terms of hospitality, how to treat a guest, for example, when they come to your
Yeah.
house. These aren't things that you think about much in India because they're just everyone does it the same
Yes.
way and it's normal. And I imagine it's similar in Nigeria as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah.
Someone comes to your house, you
You
feed
open
them
the
with loads of
door.
food, you open the fridge, that your house is you never ask them to leave, right? It's like
Yeah.
even if they say they have to leave, you're like, no, you're not leaving. You live here now. you're you're part of this house now. Here's some more food. Um, when I interact with some Europeans, right? There are some Europeans who are very hospitable, like Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans to some extent, very hospitable people. But I'm living in Northwestern Europe, which let's just say, as far as cultures go, is maybe one of the least, if not the least, hospitable in that
Mm,
way. No shade on the Germans. Everyone just knows it's true, right?
yeah.
Even the German, even the Germans know this is true. So people will do things here, like when you're visiting their house, they will say, "Okay, it's dinner time. You should leave now." Things like that, which is for an Indian.
That's strange.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's the local culture, and again, no shade, but those are moments, and this happens on a daily basis where you have these small cultural interactions with people where I realize, wow, there are a lot of things about me that are very Indian for sure.
Mm, mm. You know, I had this fella on the podcast who's a bit like you in the sense he's a bit worse off in a good way. Like, he's lived in like over, I think he's lived in like 12 countries. He's French. He's lived in Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, China, Taiwan, Portugal, the US. And he's lived in a ton of places. And it's something he said, back to your earlier point about not feeling Indian enough sometimes, is he says that even he doesn't feel French enough because he's of the opinion that human beings, like, we have different cultures and all that, but at the same time, they're just people. Like, we're all still grouped in certain behavioral traits, like all. And there's some people in your country that just won't feel like you, and some people in other countries that you meet some people in other countries, they'll be like, oh shit, like that guy or that lady feels like someone who could be my sibling, because you all kind of share the same view of the world. But I think what you also say again, which is very interesting, is I think there's that, but there's also, no matter how much we're still a bit different, because of how we are raised, there are things about us that will still root us back in the culture which we are raised in. You know, because like I said to people that I am Nigerian Canadian. Like no matter what I do, I'll always be Nigerian first, Canadian second. My kids will be Canadian Nigerians because they were raised here, so they'll be. But no matter what happens, there will still be the Nigerian part of them because they're being raised in a home that is Nigerian. Maybe my grandkids will be a bit slightly different. My grandkids will like it'll keep differing a bit depending on how they intermarry and all that. Like that's all that depends on all that. But it's just back to that your
Absolutely.
point about it. Building on that, and then with all this, how did you get to this point where you start telling all these stories you tell now about integration and national and countries and stuff? Because I'm very interested in how you got to that point.
Oh, that's a great question. So I think it came from both from, I think the root cause was, okay, so there's one side of it, which is that I've always been a ravenously curious person, to the point that, ever since I was maybe 5, 6 years old, it has annoyed me that I don't know things. Like, this is, it's an itch that I've had for as long as I can remember. If I asked a question, like I would ask my parents about certain social relations or even science-based questions, like why is the moon only half today or something like that, right? And of course, when I was a very little kid, people would just answer and I would be happy with it. I'd be like, okay. But there came a point when I reached, let's say, 11, 12, where the answers that people were giving me generally I found kind of unsatisfactory. And then I started going out and looking for information. And I was very lucky that I was around that age just when the internet kind of blew up and became very accessible as well. So, this was when I was 11, 2006, roughly.
Mm.
So I think we were still using dial-up or something, but I
Yeah.
would go on the internet and just look things up. And I think there are a lot of people like me, a lot of young people like me, who spend a lot of time on the internet just
Mm.
researching things. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you do the same as
Yeah.
well, right? Just like crawling the internet. Um, and then over my life, I started encountering more and more situations where people would not only be ignorant, but be hurtfully ignorant in the way that they would ask me questions or they would have perceptions on India or Indians, or not even necessarily on India or Indians, but on things in general that I knew were wrong. Simply on an information level, they were coming from an incorrect place. So you could say that in my own personal life, there were many moments where I would talk to people about geopolitics, history. It's something that I'm thinking about 24/7, really, almost, right? Like, where's the world going? How are
Yeah.
people interacting? I'm always thinking about these things, looking at the news, trying to connect more dots for how these things are connected. And it came to the point where I was having so many of these conversations in my daily life, to the point where, at least I think, I don't know if I'm blowing my own horn here, but I think that the friends that I have found it very fruitful quite often, right? Where I thought, well, why do I have to limit my
Mm.
reach to only the people I know or the people who I interact with on a daily basis? Would it not be more effective for me to um, just put this out on the internet? If people don't find it interesting, that's fine, because I find it super interesting. I'm always reading about this stuff, and
Mm.
I'll post it anyway. And if people find it interesting, fantastic.
Yeah.
So lucky for me, some people have found it interesting, and yeah, I hope to
Oh,
continue doing this.
it's been interesting, honestly. And like there are a lot of themes you've raised in those your interview in your things you share. And I want to ask a derivative question, which is do you have any thoughts on how the world has shaped over time? Let's hang that, and how it all relates to should immigrants integrate or should they assimilate, and why, how it has led to where we are today? Because it does feel like like for example in Canada says we're multicultural and all that stuff, and so we want you to we're a mosaic and just all that kind of stuff. America says we're a melting pot. You come in and you assimilate, like you just forget everything. And I wonder where the world has gone with all that over time, because it does feel like right now we are battling with, oh, we would rather these folks assimilate than integrate. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, from all the things you've read and all the things you've seen and the news you're consuming right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a really fantastic question, and it's something that all of us immigrants are dealing with,
Yeah,
integration versus assimilation. And there's a rise in this wave, as you said, of people who want immigrants to assimilate
yeah,
in the world. I think this is coming from a couple of places. One of the places it's coming from is the West has always had an issue with diversity. Always, always, always. Or at least for a very long time. I think the Romans, to some extent, were very multicultural. They had all these different cultures, even though the
yeah.
Romans were at the top, right? But at least since medieval times and the Crusades and things like that, Europe has always struggled with Jews, with Muslims. They never really had to interact with many Hindus or Buddhists, but I get the feeling that if there were substantial of those populations inside Europe, they would have likely had issues with them as well. So, even going back to say the Spanish Reconquista, the Spanish at that time wanted to kick all the Jews out of Spain. And many of these Jews moved to other places, like I think Genoa was one of them. And this is one of the reasons that Genoa became a sponsor of global exploration. And I
Mm.
think Christopher Columbus took off from Genoa. Don't quote me on this, but the exodus of Jews from Spain was one of the reasons that exploration started in other places, and other places'
Interesting.
economies started to grow as well. But this theme Europe has struggled with forever: diversity. Um, to the extent that they say that they believe in diversity, I've never really seen it put into practice and successful. So by that I mean, for example, India's democracy is working very well considering how diverse and multicultural it is. We have official languages, more than 20 of them. And if you look at all the different dialects and other languages that are not state languages, it goes into the hundreds. The dialects go into the tens of thousands probably. And still, people are voting peacefully, choosing their leaders. The country is functioning like normal. Now, in the West, there's always been this verbosity of multiculturalism and diversity. But when push really comes to shove, which is now, when there are actually substantial populations of multicultural, diverse peoples inside Western countries, it looks like they're not able to handle it. It looks like even though they preached diversity and multiculturalism for so long, the moment the population of multiculturalism and diversity goes above a certain threshold, it depends on which Western country, what that threshold is. Germany is hitting this point. If I think 25% of people in Germany have a migrant background, and now we're seeing the rise of the AfD, which some people would call neo-Nazis. I don't know if I'd go that far. There's definitely a sect within the AfD that is a neo-Nazi sect, that's for sure. So once Germany reaches the point where 35% of people are multicultural, and by the way, of this 25%, most of them probably do speak German. Most of them have integrated quite well with local populations, right? There might be like 5 to 10% of people who are not doing well with that. And the political system is showing cracks. And in Canada as well, diversity is reaching a point where it's actually becoming a diverse country, and the political system is showing cracks. The United States has the advantage that it's much more populous, it's much bigger, and it also just absorbs and eats people culturally, right? People come there, and by the second generation, those people they speak English mainly, they've forgotten where they've come from, or they remember, but they don't connect to it in any way. So yeah, even though Western countries say they appreciate multiculturalism, I've never seen it put to the test in a serious way and actually successful in the long term.
Mm. And I'm just wondering if, because I struggle with this a lot, yeah, and that's part of why I started this thing. Is one, just to kind of understand what does it mean to be an immigrant, and what does that mean for the people who were born here, people who came. What does it mean? Like, what does all that mean? And I wonder if there's a. I hear you on. I would say, let me first say, I hear you on um the part of where we say there's certain immigrants that are more favored than the others, like that. And sometimes I say this thing where I say I try to understand. No, maybe my wife says I shouldn't say empathize. I try to understand where the person is coming from, in the sense that humans are very comfortable with people that they know or people that look like them. So I try to understand that part, and I say, okay, there's that. So how do the immigrants have a role to play if you don't look like them, to help kind of move the bar a bit closer so that this experiment works? Because the other thing I struggle with is that I sense that the world is changing. I don't have the answers, but I sense that the world is changing. That the models that have worked for the world for a long time are falling apart. And I don't know what the new order is going to be, but I do sense that the world is changing. And I sense that one of them is that whether we like it or not, the world is because I used to read history a lot. I stopped, but I do. At some point, the world was very like some parts of the world are very multicultural. Like literally, like people tend to ignore it, but we've always been a species that have traveled and traded and done things. Like if you went to like really, 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 really old historical markets and places, they were a potpourri of different people from different parts of the world. A lot of that history is dead right now. Mesopotamia, all those places, they were literally very multicultural. But I think at some point we kind of lost that, and it became conqueror versus the conquered and all that kind of stuff. And we lived through that phase, and it gave birth to the civilization we're living in right now. But I sense that the world is changing, and part of that change is that whether we like it or not, the world is going to be a multicultural place. And that's the battle we are seeing right now. But I'm like, how do we get to the end where it works? Do we get there with by with it through a war, or through just finding some way to make it work? And I'm wondering, like, do we immigrants have a part to play in that, or are these folks just beyond repair? And like, whether we like it or not, we're always going to have to face this. There'll always be people that will say, no, I absolutely hate you all. You all don't look like me. And the people will be like, oh yeah, they're human beings like us. I want to give them a chance.
Yeah. Yeah. How do I dig into this one?
There's probably no answer to it, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, because it's a thing I think about a ton. It's like, this shit is changing, and where is it going to? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So what we're facing now is a much needed period of change. And I think to the question that you're asking, the answer will come from the West. And let me explain what I mean by that. I don't think this is our question to answer per se.
Hmm.
The West, since the year roughly 1500, has been on a diverging path with everyone else. And the reason for this is partly because of some reforms that happened in the West, but I think largely because they landed in the Americas due to geographic proximity, right? Western Europe is the closest point to the Americas,
Yeah.
and got fantastically fortunate. I'm going to say fortunate, but the result was horrific in that the 50 million or so natives of the Americas, if I remember the number correctly, almost entirely perished. Almost all of them. They died, 90%. Some estimates say 60, some say 70, they say up to 95%. They perished. Now, can you tell me if someone was wealthy in medieval times, what did that mean in terms of resources? Which resource was that?
There's land
It was land.
and war and,
It
and,
was
and an
land.
army.
So even if you look up into, I think France has some data from the 1700s that I saw in Piketty's book, Capital. If you look at the distribution of wealth in a society, today, in our world today, it's distributed something like land or agricultural land is like 5%. It's almost nothing.
Mm.
And financial markets are like 25%. Housing is another 25%. it's quite diversified, and almost none of the wealth of nations and its peoples is in land today. But if you look at the data from France, I think it starts in the 1700s and even going up to the 1800s, the early 1800s, agricultural land made up
Yeah.
80% plus of
Yeah.
wealth, right?
Yeah.
So when Europe landed in the Americas and 90% of the people perished, what actually happened was Europeans landed in a place, and at this time they were considered like the historical backwaters of the world, you could say, right? All the action was happening in Asia, more or less, and Arabia to some extent. Turkey, the Ottoman Empire was fairly wealthy, and Europe was like the random thing that nobody really thought about at the time. But suddenly they land on two continents, North America and South America, or the Americas, you could say, where all the people suddenly disappear. And immediately Europe becomes, and that the class of landowning people and the colonizers become the wealthiest people on earth. Now they still have to develop this land, they still have to cultivate it, and they're going to need an army of people to do that. And they find that army in West Africa because West African kings were very happy to conquer tribes further in the interior of Africa and send those slaves to the
Yeah.
Europeans because they were like,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever, we're getting rich and we're conquering more places
Yeah.
and getting more wives.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So the Europeans took this army of slaves and developed the Americas, the empty Americas largely. And they thought it was empty at the time, right? The first few explorers, they saw the Incas and the Mayas and they were like, oh my gosh, there are crazy civilizations here. And people came 50, 100 years later and they were like, what were those people talking about? Like, there's nobody here because everybody disappeared, right? And this creates a power differential that we're still feeling the effects of today. Now, Europeans, they take this power differential and come back to Asia, come back to Africa, but it takes time before the power differential is big enough that they can actually colonize Asia and Africa, right? The scramble for Africa starts in, I think, the 1890s or the 1860s. Late 1800s is when Africa actually starts to be colonized. So this 300 years of a gap between the discovery of the Americas, and I think it was 1490 something, and the actual colonization of the powers of the world, which were Asia and Africa, there's 300 years between that of Europeans cultivating land that became empty, using the help, you could say, or the slavery of the West Africans that they took there. Now, after this power differential, there's a period of transition where Europeans went from, at first, and in the 1600s, and even going into the 1700s, coming to Asia and saying, the cultures here are amazing and we have so much to learn in terms of medicine, in terms of commerce, in terms of crafts, in terms of metallurgy, all kinds of things. There's so much to learn from these places. They would dress like the locals. They would try and learn local languages. So
Mhm.
this was a period in which Europeans were assimilating to Asian cultures because of the power differential there. There came a flip in the 1800s where the power differential became so large, largely due to the Americas and the capital formation that started, that Europeans started believing the culture to be superior. And this came to some extent as directives. Like William Dalrymple has a fantastic book about this called White Mughals, which were British white people who came to India and they would adopt the Mughal attire. And then over time, they got directives from their higher ups to stop wearing Indian clothes, to stop speaking Indian languages, and to be pure English, right? And make the Indians assimilate to our culture. So this transition happens in the 1800s, and this is also the period of the most accelerated narrative building of Western cultural superiority that we see, of the expectation that if other peoples want to be successful, they should assimilate to Western values and cultures. And they made the incorrect assumption that because they were materially more successful, which, as I pointed to earlier, is largely because of the discovery of the Americas, that it means that the culture was superior as well.
Yeah.
And this is the hangover we're dealing with today. Because now what's happening is the West is realizing, like, let's say between North America and Europe, they're only roughly 10 to 15% of the global population. And that has always been true. North America plus Europe has only been 10 to 15% of the global population. Now, because of the global divergence, they didn't feel like 10 to 15% of the global population. They felt very powerful. They felt like they mattered a lot. People were assimilating to their cultures. People were
Yeah.
begging to come to their countries. And they didn't even have to let those people come in. Like, okay, we'll let people if we want to in small amounts, and they have to assimilate as well. Now we're reaching this tipping point where we've gone from the great divergence to what I call the great convergence, where GDPs are growing in Asia very quickly. Africa is also growing, not as quickly, but I think its time will come in about 30, 40 years. I think Africa's time is going to come of high growth. The populations are as big as they've always been, perhaps
Yeah.
even bigger to some extent. And the West not only is losing its technological and economic edge,
Yeah.
it's also losing its population edge because its demographics are collapsing. And so now it's not the question of them letting people in, it's them asking people to move. And those people don't necessarily have to assimilate. They're reducing the requirements, right? I think Canada's facing some of this issue where they've reduced the requirements of the Indians they're bringing into Canada. And many Canadians are complaining, like, oh, the Indians pre 2020 used to be great and highly educated, and now the Indians that are coming over are shitting on the beaches or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that is happening to some extent, but that's happening because the West desperately needs people in order to maintain its relevance in the world. And that's why we're seeing this friction happen now. It's they're letting in many more people with a lower bar, and also those people don't necessarily need to or want to assimilate because their own countries are gradually getting better. They can always go back. I can always go back to India, and I probably will in 5 to 10 years, or maybe even less, in like 3, 4 years, depending on how things progress. And the local populations who've grown up hearing from their parents and their grandparents, and this is something that's been passed down since the 1800s, that their local cultures are superior. This is why they colonize the world. This is why they're so developed. This is why everyone wants to come to these countries. They're having to reconcile this view with there's so many of these other people. There are so many of them. They're different from us. They don't necessarily always want to assimilate. And this is where this friction is coming from. Now, as an immigrant, do I want to assimilate? Absolutely not. Because that is, in my opinion, colonization. The power differential, as I covered earlier, is the reason for the expectation of assimilation. I want a world where Europeans, Canadians, and North Americans come to India to assimilate. And they have to struggle. And they have to struggle to learn our languages. They're like, oh my gosh, I have to pass my B1 level test in Canada or whatever, right? Like, I don't know how I can live in this country.
Oh my god.
That's the world. That's the world I want to see, right? I definitely don't want a world where I'm not going to assimilate to any one of these countries. I don't want other immigrants to do so as well, because I think it's taking a step down from the diversity, the culture that their ancestors and people have worked over tireless generations to build. And just because there's a power differential now, I mean, if people want to, if they really want to, and they're like, I love this culture, I love the German culture and the Wurst and whatever it is, right? The sausages. I really want to assimilate, do it. That's fantastic. But when it comes from a place of I need to do it so I can live a good life, that's where I have an issue. People should not feel the need to. At the very least, I'd like to see an equal world where Westerners don't need to assimilate in the East, which is already the case, right? Westerners
Yeah.
live in
Yeah.
Southeast
They
Asia,
don't.
they
I
live in
mean,
India, they live in bubbles, they get drivers, they speak their own language. They never have to speak the local language because people, even in their own countries, move out of their way to accommodate Westerners. Now, if we're living in an equal world, this will also be the case in the West. And we're seeing cracks in the system now. We're seeing protests in Spain, for example, about over tourism because there's a shitload of people who now have money who are coming to Spain, and Spanish people, like, they don't even speak the language. They're, crowding the whole place out with their money. And it's like, welcome to the world, Spain. Welcome to the world that everyone else has been living in for a very, very long time. And I'd like to see an equal world where everybody doesn't have to assimilate. Integration is great, right? You follow the laws, you follow the rules, you be productive, you pay your taxes. But beyond that, it should just be voluntary and not something people feel pressured to do. That's how I feel about this whole thing.
that's such an interesting take. The I had a question I have for you, like, what's the other side of this conversation? And this is I know you've probably thought about it. Like, what's the Western side of this conversation, where they justify it and where it feels justifiable?
I mean, from the Western side, it is understandable in that they want to maintain social stability, and if their political systems are not able to appropriately handle diversity, like let's say you're Germany, you're one of the most homogenous countries on earth up until about, you know, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Extremely homogenous, almost entirely white, German speaking. Yeah, sure, they have different dialects of German, but whatever. And that is how the system has worked. Now, if incorporating people who look different, who speak differently from the local people, results in political instability,
Yeah.
from political instability, you get economic instability. From economic instability, you might get military instability, right? One of the things that's happening now is, for example, Russia is pressing forward with its offensive in Ukraine for its own reasons. And they're even flying planes over NATO, over Poland, over other places, Lithuania, for example, drones and planes near the border because they're testing Europe. They're like, look, we may be much poorer than you, but we're able to take pain. You guys want to start a fight? We're okay to start a fight. Are you ready to start a fight? And the question for Europe is they have this, as one, I forget who said this, the chief of some European international body. He said Europe is a garden and the rest of the world is a jungle,
What
which is
the
how many
fuck?
Europeans think. Yeah, which is how
What the fuck?
many people here think. Europe is a garden and the rest of the world is a jungle. But the thing is, this garden is in a very precarious stability. Now, if they have to actually start a war or engage in a war, they're going to have to give things up. The Germans are already talking about giving up social welfare. They're talking about giving up, they might have to reduce pensions. France is reducing pensions by increasing the age that people start getting pensions, and it's causing huge protests in France. So even with the existing status quo, there's instability to the point where they might not be able to fight a war, which they might need to do, without causing huge political turmoil. For example, the AfD might win.
Mm.
Um, even if they just have more immigrants, the AfD might win. And the AfD, which is like this hard right party in Germany, might implement anti-immigration policies in Germany that will destroy the German economy. And the German centrists and the leftists, they know this to some extent, especially that they're very intelligent people in power here. And I even had a debate with one of them a few weeks ago. Extremely intelligent guy. He he knows the position that these countries are in. And so this is the question for them. They want people to assimilate because they want to avoid at all costs instability,
Yeah.
the rise of the AfD. The AfD will rise if non-assimilating immigrants come into the West and start showing themselves, right? And that's going to lead to the destruction of Germany because this hard right party is going to stop immigration. European economies get destroyed. So from the centrist parties in Europe, they're they're striking a very hard balance here. On the one side, they know they need immigration, so they're trying to get it. But on the other side, they don't want it to be too much or they don't want it to be too diverse because then their own enemies within the country, which are hard right parties, are going to win and destroy their own countries from within. And at the same time, there's external threats as well. So I think they have good reasons to want assimilation. It makes total sense. Everybody would like assimilation if they had the power to request it. But I disagree with it, and I do not want to be part
Oh,
of
I
that
totally,
script.
for me, I hate the word assimilation. Like, I hate it.
Yeah.
I absolutely hate it. I say it like, I believe in integration, not assimilation. Don't tell me to strip off myself to become like, I can't even do that. I can respect your culture. I can adjust to it. I can become part of you. I can actually, and the funny thing about the human being is that just even integration allows me even adopt your culture more. I don't know, but the thing that I was thinking about while you're talking was, are humans cursed? Are we a cursed species who are just doomed to destroy ourselves over and over and over again? Because one is, what is, I think there's a James Baldwin quote. Let me find it while we're talking. Where's the James Baldwin quote? Let me see. Where he says, shit, where's he? Sorry.
No worries.
Uh, what? People are not, for example, terribly anxious to be equal. equal after all to what and to whom, but they love the idea of being superior. And I think about that quote a lot because I feel like it's a pithy description of the human problem, which is that in all the things we talk about, the biggest battle we have is with ourselves, which is the idea of self superiority over the other. I mean, like we even do that within family circles and within our own country. So talk more of when you now scale that up to country level and cultural level issues. Because sometimes I say, isn't the simple answer just simply just accepting that we can all be equal and all live together as a people in our own way and just respect each other's cultures to some extent? You know, because and I also then again it also goes back to that thing I was saying earlier about the world is changing, and I feel like a lot of the narrative engines that were built to run the world a long time ago aren't exactly working as they should work. Because for example, one narrative engine that was built is one culture is superior to the other, which is why we are seeing the rise of eugenic conversations again. Which is, I saw something about blue blood races, and I was just like, I was just like, God, this is the reason why I don't go on Twitter anymore, because I'm just like, I don't even want I don't want to read this kind of things, you know. And it's just like those narrative engines have led us to where we are right now, which is because I can almost say that part of like you just talked about the German guy who you debated with, and I'm like, there's a narrative engine that's defined the world we've built, and we know somehow that that narrative engine, once you bring in certain kind of people, it destroys that narrative and creates political instability. And so you're now just trying to fix the balance. Like, why don't you just fix the narrative then? Is it so hard to
Yeah,
fix the narrative?
exactly. It is very difficult for them to fix the narrative, which is somewhat baffling to me. I feel like they should just be able to come out there and just say it like it is. But of course, politics is more complicated than my
Yeah,
simple
exactly.
mind
Yeah,
can
it's
comprehend.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I interviewed someone a couple of days ago. And she said something that I hadn't thought about before, which is she says there's always a policy lag. And to the human beings, we don't like that, but that's the truth. And politicians never say that because then they can't win. Because again,
Exactly.
but I would argue that that's because that's the brand of politics we've built over time. Like we've built a politics that is built around this kind of subterfuge and all that shit. But there's a policy lag because when you start trying to do a policy, it takes quite some time for you to flow through the system because humans are naturally bureaucratic. Once you put us inside groups, we turn into there's the crab, there's tall poppy syndrome. There's a ton of things that we struggle with that just means that the incentives that happen within a political structure, a political or running a country just makes things a bit hard. But yeah. But since we're here, I think, and we're talking about narratives, and you touched a bit about it. I think it's like on because I feel like the biggest one right now is the Indian hate because it feels like I always say I'm a big Rennie Girard fan, and he has this thing about scapegoats. He talks about this mimetic and all that and scapegoats and how every now and then humans look for someone to become the scapegoat for all the sins of everyone else.
Mm,
And I was saying to a friend that it's just so sad to see. Like, it feels like it feels like there's a mimetic virus right now where the scapegoat is the Indian. It's like
yeah.
they are the ones who are the we should hold them responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes I always say okay, so what are there things that they've done to deserve that? But again, I also say that you know the other day some guy almost hit me and it was a white guy, and I'm like, if this was an immigrant that did this, like someone would say, "Oh shit, this idiot's aren't integrating. Look at this black guy." If I was one of look at this black guy, he's come
Yeah.
here and he's just driving. But like I'm like, you were probably a white guy, but you can do it. Like, so why should I be viewed different from you? Like, so if you hit me and kill me on the road, does that like is the burden of cultural integration different for both of us? Like, I don't know. It's just a weird thing. But
It
like,
does.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Because of the power differential, right? You're a Nigerian black man in Canada, and you are perceived as socially weaker, that socially you need the system more than the local white people need the system. And the system treats you like that. Regarding your earlier question about Indians as the scapegoat, I think it's a good thing.
I like
So
that.
I think it's a good thing because I think a lot of Indians are waking up to the reality of the world as a result of what they're facing now. I've seen it online with many people. It still has a long way to go. But have you heard of this thing called a pick me girl?
Yes.
Girls who are like, pick me, and they try and
Yeah.
be cool like the guys or whatever. Well, if there were any people in the world who were pick me people, it's Indians. Indians have a very deep colonial history going back to the British. And during that time, the British would try and they elevated a certain class of Indians to a more prestigious class, but they were under the British still, but a more prestigious class than the rest of their brethren by culturally assimilating to British values, speaking English, wearing a suit and a shirt and tie or whatever. This has not changed in Indians, generally speaking. Indians still find a great deal of validation from being liked by Westerners, from being accepted by Westerners, from being told that they're smart or good immigrants. And as you can see, Indians in the West have done everything that they can to fit into that mold. I mean, Indians are the highest income earning group in the US. I don't know about Canada, but it's probably one of the higher income earning groups in Canada, one of the highest income earning groups in Australia, in the UK. It's very similar, right? Similar. Indians go and become model immigrants. Absolutely low crime, very high education levels on average, um, very high income on average. Essentially, if you want everything from an immigrant, right, they're winning spelling bees because they're learning the local language so well, right? They're winning math and spelling bees. It's like assimilation 101. I mean, they keep their Hindu heritage to some extent or, their Indian heritage, depending on the religion. But Indians are like trying to be the model immigrants who are accepted by the West. So even the way I talk about, not wanting to assimilate and not wanting to become part of the Western story in that way, it irks many Indians because many Indians have the goal in their head to actually do this, to assimilate, to want to integrate further. And they perceive people like me with a different narrative as anti their goals. So now people are realizing that to some extent, you can do everything. You can learn the language, you can become the model immigrant, but there's an otherness about you being an Indian, unless you're willing to totally wipe your history clean, forget where you come from, forget your religion, forget where the native land you come from. And even then, you'll probably still face problems like you almost got assaulted by this white guy in Canada. I think now there's a wave of realization in India that the goal we should be chasing is not to be model immigrants. That's still happening, of course. Indians are still performing well as immigrants, but that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to find a higher standing rooted in India itself. There's many people realizing this. We can't keep going to the West and trying to become model immigrants because one small mistake, one small slip up, or anything, and people might scapegoat us as they're doing right now. It might go away in a year or two, but it'll come back in 10 years again, potentially. Also because there are so many of us. We are 18% of the global population, one of the largest immigrant groups in most Western countries now, and increasing very fast simply because there are a shitload of Indians out there. So this wave of hate, I think, is medicine. I think people need it to realize our place in the world, to realize that the way to achieve your goal of finding security for yourself, for your family, for your people, is not necessarily through assimilation or integration, even though that can be a route that you take for that, but through the elevation of the homeland, through the elevation of its people, through the reduction of poverty. And this way you can find true security in this new globalized world.
You know, I'm gonna come back to what I like about what you say is so sometimes I can be very I feel like sometimes I can live it I can have these utopian ideals of maybe the world can be peaceful, but maybe the world I think it was a Susan Sontag's essay I was reading of recent regarding the pain of others, where she says that people think that peace is the order of the world, but no, war is the order of the world. Peace is the anomaly. And which is kind of linked to what you're saying, which is that we've lived so much in peace that we think that's the way of the world. But the way of the world is actually war. Like, we're always at war with each other. Peace is an anomaly. And I came out of that realization saying to myself that I think that's why people like soccer a lot, for example. Because I think that soccer at its core is really just war.
Absolutely. Sports is really just an
Sports
outlet
is
for
just
that.
war. Yes. Sports is the thing which we don't know it, but sports is the thing which we've channeled all our war urges as human beings, because there is the one thing where we all gather around one thing and we are cheering on the army to go vanquish the other army, but it's done peacefully, but it's
Yeah,
war.
exactly. Exactly. There's always this tribalistic element
Yeah,
in
exactly.
human beings. And this is another thing that has bugged me about Westerners in particular, and to some extent, Japanese as well, that they have deluded themselves and forgotten what the world really is. And the reason that they've done that is because they were the most warring, if I dare say, savage peoples out there in terms of what they did to other people, right? What they did to the slaves in North America, for example, or in South America. Um, Absolutely violent in many ways. And then they had World War One and Two. And after World War Two, Europe destroyed itself and the United States became king.
Yeah.
It demilitarized Germany, demilitarized Japan. The UK was a shell of what it was before. France was a shell of what it was before, right? These were no longer truly global powers, and it has been declining ever since then. And it's only in this framework that the West has found peace. The
Yeah.
West has never found peace when everybody was strong and somewhat equal, and then they were like, okay, yeah, let's be peaceful. Then there would be some merit, there would be some credit to what they're saying. But if your peace is because a big giant power showed up and demilitarized your whole country, well, no shit, there's peace because you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice but peace. And again, this is one of those narratives of cultural superiority. Ah, look how peaceful and stable the West is. No, the West is entirely colonized and demilitarized by the United States of America. They defer to all the foreign policy choices of the United States of America. And now the West is waking up again because the US is retreating, and
Yeah.
almost immediately we're in a state of war again. So it's like
Yeah.
you had no ground to stand on before, and you definitely certainly don't have any ground to stand on now. And I was looking at the news just yesterday, and here's another one of these like Western values, the Western values that they like to preach. Europe is considering forcing Chinese companies to do technology transfer in the EU. And I was laughing to myself when I saw this, because one of the other things of Western values that we've heard for the last 30 years was that the West doesn't copy. It's just the Chinese that are not as superior as us that are copying all of our stuff. We don't copy. We participate in a level playing field in a fair world. These are Western values. Now look at just the last 6 months. TikTok has become successful in the US, right? And the US used to say, oh, China is so bad. They don't allow our companies and they stole our tech and they made their own versions in China. And now the US has forced China to sell TikTok USA at dirt cheap prices. So there goes American values, right? And other countries are still living with Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp, giving their data to the Americans. But when other countries say, oh, this is a national security threat, the Americans say, look at this nationalist country that doesn't understand the Western values of living together. But when push comes to shove in the West, all of those values go out the window. The EU is now asking China to do forced technology transfer in the EU. Again, the EU has complained for decades that, oh, China is copying, but we don't do that because we're better. The moment it actually becomes a threat, not even 5 years after China has developed an edge in certain technologies, poof, values go out the window. We're going to steal some Chinese tech. I can name like countless examples of these types of Western values and cultural values that they've preached to the world for decades since World War II, which again was an uneasy peace just because of United States superiority, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union. That now that the world is finally reaching a place of equality, they're behaving just as bad, if not much worse, than the people who they were preaching to for the last 80 years. So this we're seeing the true nature of the West now, right? It's evolving now, and now we're seeing what they really are. And this is why I said the answer will come from the West, not from us. How they deal with this world, this more equal world, this is a question that we have to ask the West. It's not a question that we have to answer.
Hmm. I want to kind of go back to the forgive me, the Indian hit thing. I was curious, like, and so I sense from what you're saying is that no no matter what the Indian does, and this is probably the immigrant in general, because it can be Indian
Yeah,
today, it could be Nigerian tomorrow.
exactly.
You're always going to get called out because people will call out, oh, the Indians are doing this, oh, they are celebrating their festivals, they are doing all this stuff and all that, and so that will always be a problem. Like it doesn't matter. Like even if you scale it down, someone's going to find a reason. Is that the point you're trying to make? Like it doesn't matter. Like we're stuck with that thing, like because there's nothing like the perfect immigrant. I think it's actually unfair to expect someone to be perfect, to be honest, because it feels like
Exactly.
as an
Because that
immigrant
is
you're expected to be
assimilation.
perfect. Yeah, that's assimilation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, there might be a small chance that the West learns to live multiculturally, to live in real diversity. But are we as immigrants going to sit and pray again for the West to be our saviors? Oh, 15 years from now, by Lord, I pray and hope that in the West my culture is accepted and that I can celebrate it on the streets. I'm not comfortable giving that kind of power to people who are not my people, right? I'm not comfortable sitting around in a Western country and saying, oh, wow, in 15 years, yeah, now there's hate, but in 15 years, maybe there won't be. Maybe we can work toward. That's a risk. There's a chance that it happens,
Yeah.
but there's also a chance it doesn't happen. There's a chance it happens and then it goes back again in 30 years because of some other demographic issue or some political instability. And again, your immigrant community becomes the scapegoat, right? I'm almost certain that in the next 5 to 10 years, we might see a wave of anti-African hate, right? Maybe in the next 20 years, because Africa's population is swelling a lot. It's going to become a very attractive source for migrants for Europe, for Canada, for Australia, simply because there are lots of educated Nigerians, lots of educated Ethiopians, Egyptians, uh, like yourself, right? You're an
Ghanaians,
educated
Kenya.
man, and
Yeah.
Ghanaians, exactly. Many places with high populations. Nigeria itself has a population of, if I'm not mistaken, 200 million people.
Yeah.
This puts it at half the population of the EU. This is not an insubstantial amount of people. So we're going to see more of these issues going forward, in my opinion. We have to brace ourselves. We have to strengthen the homeland. We have to strengthen ourselves if we live in these countries. Again, I'm not saying we have to go out onto the streets or be violent or anything like that. Continue to be a rule following, peaceful immigrant. But let's not have wool over our eyes that maybe they'll accept us tomorrow, maybe they'll accept us next year, maybe they'll accept us 10 years from now. I think we should understand what the world is simply and take things as they come and expect negative outcomes as well.
Hmm. That is
Sorry, it's not the most optimistic.
that is sobering, honestly. That is sobering. Because then it just means that I think it kind of goes back to like we're a warring tribe as humans, where we just war. We always are looking for who's going to be superior in the end somehow.
Now,
But I mean, you don't think that there's something that can be like I think, and I think it's probably linked to, isn't there something that can be done via integration and narrative building to even kind of get to some world that at least understands, because it's just a struggle to see. I look at this, I'm just like, what are we actually even doing as a people? To be honest, like, what are we doing?
yeah. We're just humaning.
Yeah,
Just humaning.
like it's a ridiculous one, honestly. It's like, is this what humaning feels like? It's just the point where we grow up, because it feels like when you grow up, you just kind of understand. Like someone said, you grow up and you understand. You start to hit the wall. You start to understand why some people become hermits,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they're like, gosh, humans are really a tiring bunch, and they just
Yeah,
walk away from them because we just can be something.
absolutely. Personally, I find the direction the world is going quite exciting.
But I feel like if you were born 500 years ago, you should have been a war general. Honestly, like I feel
It's possible, dude. I've thought about this sometimes actually. I'm like, in my past life, I was probably
yeah,
some sort of general.
yeah, maybe
But
a war general. Honestly,
not only militarily exciting, and of course, I hope that the world never comes to World War III. I hope we never come to nuclear war because this would be a horrific outcome for lots of people.
yeah,
But what I do find exciting is the geopolitical power play that's happening because now, see, if I could take you on a little bit of a journey, when I
sure,
was a
please.
kid, my grandfather would tell me stories. He would say, when I grew up, I would go to school, and every day the teacher would say, the sun never sets on the British Empire. That was my grandfather's experience. And up until he was an old man, he wore a suit and tie. He was a doctor. He wore a suit and tie. He spoke mainly in English. He believed the British were the ultimate people out there. And I think there are nice values to some aspects of British culture that we can learn from, no doubt. But my grandfather was a bit delusional, in my opinion, in this way. May he rest in peace. I love him to death. But he grew up in this colonial
I
system,
love you,
right?
Aashrit. Honestly, go.
And my parents were halfway in between my grandfather and myself. They they always told me that the white people are correct. We lived in Dubai where it was very multicultural, and from a very young age, I had experiences where um, my parents might get into an argument with people from a different ethnicity, and if they were white, you're best off not even arguing, even if you're right. Even if my dad, was correct or my mom was correct, if someone was arguing, this is like early 2000s, late 90s, when there was still a big differential in terms of the ladder of ethnicities in Dubai, which is a thing, by the way. It's the Emiratis at the top, which are the locals. It's, I guess you could say, Qataris and stuff near where they are. Then it's white people. Then it's other Arabs to some extent, right? And this might be fluctuating and changing depending on the situation. Then it's Indians, and then I'm sorry to say, but it's not my fault. It's Africans, right? In this society, but maybe Indians and Africans are at the same level. Maybe sometimes Indians are lower, depending on the situation. Again, this is what I saw growing up, and it gave me a very good sense of my place in the world. Where was I even going with this? I don't. I just went. I just went on some kind of tangent, but um, essentially. So why did I go into the story with my grandfather?
I'm trying. I mean, you said you were taking on a journey, but maybe the journey stopped somewhere, or maybe you're
So,
trying to describe how. I suspect you're trying to describe how.
I was talking about the trajectory of
Yeah.
geopolitics.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
In the story of my grandfather's experience, to my parents' experience, to my experience, we see a trajectory. And this is only my story, and there's many, many stories like me in India, maybe in Nigeria as well. I don't know. But in Asia, with Chinese people, it's even more pronounced than my story. Their grandparents probably thought America, Meiguo, as they call it, beautiful land, is the best place on earth. To some extent, they still think that. Their parents probably felt a little bit less so as China was growing. And now these kids growing up in China, I'm seeing them talking on Instagram and they're like, look at how amazing China is. Look at how proud they
Yeah.
are of their people. Look at how proud they are of their culture. Look at the roads. Look at the infrastructure. And many of us peoples around the world who were formerly colonized um, are only now reaching a trajectory where we can finally be self assured and proud of where we come from. India is not there yet, but this is a journey. It's a work in progress, especially over the last 5, 10 years. You feel a totally different energy from Indians across the world. This is what I find exciting. This is the world we live in. There is going to be struggles for power. There's going to be violence. There's going to be conflict. And I pray for the people that get affected by this negatively, the people that die, the people that, um, are affected by the cracks that are forming in the world. And I hope that that doesn't happen. I hope it doesn't have to be violent. But we are also seeing so much positivity happen in terms of the trajectory of our peoples, of Africans, of Nigerians, of Indians, of Asians, of Chinese people. Peoples who have been oppressed or humiliated for centuries and having to assimilate, having to kowtow to Western powers, both geopolitically but also individually as immigrants, for example. And what I find extremely exciting about the world today and the world that we're heading to in the next 10, 20, 30 years is that we're going to see the fruition of starting with China, then India, and eventually, I pray, Nigeria and Africans as well, not feeling like that anymore. That's the
Yeah.
that's the exciting part for me.
Yeah. I think another thing I take from that is that, which is kind of sad to know, but it's like there's just power is just power.
Exactly.
Power is
It's
just
always
power.
been the case,
Yeah, it's
and
all like
it always will be.
I think the best leaders have always known how to balance between culture and power and status and policy and integration and all that. Not very few countries have done it well. Maybe we need to go back in history a long time back to see the rulers who did that, and there was probably still some stratification within the people in society. But at the core, it's just power is just power. Like that's just what it is. Like
It's just what it is.
yeah,
We have to,
humans.
at some point, just accept it.
Yeah, humans. This is just humans, and power just and equality probably only happens when we all kind of have some form of everyone says, okay, I'm going to respect you because I think that you can hurt me as much as I can hurt you, and so we all
Exactly.
just find some balance between each other and just say, okay, let's respect each other and build societies that respects every other person. I think
Precisely.
maybe that's the sad reality of the human race. I don't know. It'll be sad to realize that, but it just feels like that's what I'm getting from this is like it seems like that's the majority of the way around most of our problems.
Absolutely. I mean, even if we look at the way that Europeans or Americans interact with the world today as tourists, um, by the way, let me know if we're going too much over time
No,
and I
no,
can
that's okay.
stop.
I've got time here. I've got time here. It's you I'm
If we
worried
look
about, but yeah, let's go. Because you have a little one, yeah. We're rounding up soon, actually. So yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So when I travel in Southeast Asia, yes, there's bad behavior from immigrants of all and from tourists of all kinds, right? The Chinese are known for being a little bit obnoxious and like taking up space in certain ways. Indians are known for being their own kind of obnoxious. But you also notice that there's a lot of Europeans in Southeast Asia and in India who do things that are perhaps rude for the local cultures. For example, they'll walk around without shirts. You've probably seen a lot of this in places like Bali, even in India. They'll ride bikes around town without shirts. They'll go into shops without shirts. Now, no hate for not wearing shirts, like whatever, right? Like I'm pro nudism or whatever, but you don't see you don't see Africans or Indians doing this in Western countries. You don't see them going into like a grocery store without a shirt because they think it would be rude for the local, and it probably would be, right? It probably would be a bit rude for the local peoples. And to some extent, even Americans travel the world, and people are extremely afraid to get into a negative altercation with Americans in particular. To some extent with Europeans, but especially with Americans. Why is that? Because America has such power and state capacity that they will come to your country and mess your shit up if you mess with even one American. Even if they're doing something wrong, even if they like deal in drugs or something and that's illegal in your local country. If they go to jail for that, America will go through hell to get them back. And so they can walk around the world with some level of confidence because behind them is power, economic power, threat of violence. Unfortunately, that's part of it. Military power is part of it because America can do this around the world because of military power. Um, so yeah, you were saying power earlier, and
Yeah.
it's absolutely true. And when will Indians be able to walk around confidently in the world? When we have power.
Oh God. This is probably a good place to end this.
Oh, one last thing.
Sure.
Mao always said, Mao, just one quote.
Yeah.
No, when I first read it, I never understood it. Mao Zedong once said, I forget the exact words, but he said, political power flows from the barrel of a gun. I never understood it as a young man when I first read it, but the more I
Mm,
learn about the world, the more I
yeah,
understand where he was coming from.
yeah, I agree. I think I know enough of the world now to just kind of realize that, yeah, you can intellectual power, all that military power is still the thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The ability to project violence.
Yes.
You don't even have to do it. Just
You
project
don't have to use
violence.
it. Exactly. The
Just
threat that
project.
it exists.
Yeah, that you projection of violence. You know, there's that this thing they say that a weak man is a man that doesn't have the capacity for violence is a weak man. Like the strong ones are the ones who can project violence but decide not to
But
use
don't
it.
use it.
Yeah, those are the most scary
Exactly.
ones because then and you see them and you know that you're scared of them because you know that if you try, you will probably get hurt, and so you respect yourself. You know.
Exactly. That's amazing that you bring that up. One of the things that I love so much about geopolitics is that all the lessons of an individual and of how to be a better man or a better person in general, they apply almost one to one to geopolitics, just as you've just described.
Yeah, true, very true. Asher, thank you. This has been an
Dozier,
hour plus well spent, honestly.
I agree. I agree completely. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much. Oh man. Like I feel like I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna download the transcript and just read it and be like, okay, there's a ton I need to go think about from this.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, man. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we get to do this again at some
Oh
point.
yeah, I would love to, honestly. I would love to. All right. That was intense. But also I think an important conversation to have. I mean, because I think I can be a bit utopian, but I think Ash is right. Power is power. It's just what it is. But yeah, thank you for getting to this point of the episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoy talking to Aashrit. If you know someone who finds this useful, please send to them. If you know someone who's as smart as him who I should talk to, please send them my way. As always, please like, share, subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get a podcast, you find us there. Just type the Newcomers Podcast. Thanks very much and have a good day. Ciao.